Well, welcome to DesignCon, Karl.
Thanks, Jack.
So who do we have here, Karl?
Karl Bois from TE Connectivity.
And tell me, what do you do there?
So I am essentially a system architect I'm a senior technologist at TE.
So what does that mean?
So TE Connectivity essentially does interconnect. So essentially you can have, let's say, something talking to something. So a chip talking to memory or something.
Like IoT 101.
Sure, yeah. Interconnect. So you're going to try to send electrons from one side to the other, and essentially at a certain point you're going to need to connect them. It could be two boards, it could be different things that are essentially connected, cables, whatnot. And essentially this part essentially occupies a lot more of concern, or when you're trying to design these things either mechanically or electrically, they tend to be a much more bigger consideration than they used to be. So like, for example, let's assume like you've got a weight limit on your suitcase and it's 25 pounds. And you've got your bottle of water, which is maybe semi-full, I don't know, maybe it weighs a pound. Well, if you're running because you're late for your plane and you're swinging that piece of suitcase, that pound of water swishing around is more than a pound, right? So in a system of you running, you probably should have planned on that bottle of water being there. We are part of the interconnect, and in a whole scheme of things, every part is more than just its little part. It's now part of the sum.
So is it primarily hardware you're dealing with or software as well?
It's mainly hardware.
So what does that look like?
So it could be, I like to say sometimes, like, if you really vulgarize it, like bring it down to a level, it's a bunch of, let's say, plastic and metal, but orchestrated really, really well into very neat form factor to deliver essentially electrical performance at really, really high data rates.
So how do you end up doing what you do?
So if you had asked my parents when I was in school, they probably wouldn't have said I would be here. Music essentially was more of an interest. But after being a poor musician for about a year, I decided, you know what, maybe I'll decide to use that brain. And went into engineering, was just fascinated by it, by essentially in electrical engineering, just a multifaceted aspect of it, and just trying to piece things together. I think essentially engineers, as if you, at the core, we're just like big babies that essentially just are amazed by the world all the time and try to find coherency in there and like how things all fit.
So you've been doing this for some time now.
21 years.
So what have you seen? Where are we today versus say 10 years ago?
I think that what's really interesting is my background. I used to be with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, which used to be HP.
We've heard of them.
Yes, of course. And initially there was a lot of consumer and enterprise, and you saw a lot of the enterprise dominating, like the big mainframes and things like that. And now if you think as just individuals, we drive so much of what the big things need to be. So, if you're streaming a movie on one of the many possibilities, the Netflix, the Primes, or things like that, you become quite annoyed if your streaming movie suddenly stops. And we're driving so much content that what it has to deliver that has become so much more tuned and, albeit complicated, has to be so much more elegant. It can't just be brute force.
So does 5G change all that? 5G
has, from my perspective, and if you look at the pandemic, what do? We wanted to talk a lot more. We wanted to stream, we wanted to talk, you wanted to see your mom, you wanted to see your friends and things like that. We drove so much content, and 5G at least was one heck of an answer to that. But think about it, 5G is what we have here in the airspace, right? Well, that at a certain point has to reach a physical box that is essentially saying, well, this text that got sent goes to this person, and this movie goes to that person, and that cat video goes from Johnny to Kathy. 5G essentially drives all that content that then gets aggregated somewhere that has to make it somewhere else. So the 5G by itself has essentially exploded the amount of content that then has to be corralled.
And that's where the edge comes in?
The edge and many other things, yes. So the edge is like, so it depends what the edge means to a lot of people, but for my kids, the edge is their Xbox. So they're playing, And essentially at a certain point, they're playing with their other friends. So the compute unit that is closest to them is their Xbox. And it's starting to and kids get really annoyed when they want to shoot their other friend and the click button doesn't really time properly. Then essentially that's all that bandwidth and all that data that essentially at a certain point finally has to go somewhere else.
So we're now at DesignCon live,
Yes.
actually.
What
Is
a
this your
concept.
first one in a while?
In a while, yes.
But you've been here before?
Yes, I have.
So what do you expect this year versus previous years?
I expect a few less people, and for good reasons, but I expect, like I said, you just alluded to 5G, you just alluded, we spent 2 years essentially being apart from each other, and so I'm expecting the content that we'll see is an explosion of data. But I'm also really hoping, and I know it's going to happen, is there's a lot of people that have been wanting to talk for a long time. And I'm already seeing it like out of the talks, it's just happening. Like we've got a really like a little bug here that's been like nagging of us to really talk to each other.
So what do people want to talk about something, or they just want to talk to each other live?
Live.
That's it?
Yes, live, yes. There are some things that essentially one other virtual meeting won't cut it. Being able to put things on paper, like reading the body language and things like that, those are things that have been abstracted.
So is DesignCon 2021 the beginning of you getting back on the road?
For me it is. It's the first time I got in a plane since February of 2020.
Thank you so much, Karl.
Hey, thanks, Chuck.